Imagine someone whose world just resets every few minutes. You meet them, talk to them, and moments later, it's like it never happened. They can't form new memories. The future, for them, just stops existing.
It sounds like science fiction, but it was real. A truly tragic situation for the person involved.
Absolutely tragic. Yet, this man's profound memory loss, it turned out to be one of science's greatest gifts. It unlocked incredible secrets about our own brains, how we store memories, how we retrieve them, how we use knowledge.
Yeah, that man was Henry Gustav Molaison. Though in the scientific world, he was mostly known just as HM. And his case wasn't just another data point. It completely revolutionized neuroscience. It forced us to throw out old ideas about memory and really start fresh.
So today, that's what we're diving into, HN's extraordinary journey. And our mission here is to unpack his story, not just the standard neuroscience take, which is fascinating enough, but also through a couple of newer frameworks, learnography and Brainpage theory.
Right, these emerging ideas.
We want to see what his really unique condition tells us about memory, yes, but also about learning itself. And maybe even about how knowledge transfer is designed, or perhaps how it should be designed.
It's an absolutely compelling story.
Yeah.
And like you said, it really makes you think about what it means to live, as they called it, in a permanent present tense.
Okay, so let's get into it. Who was Henry Molaison, the man behind this memory mystery?
Well, he wasn't a scientist, as you said, just an ordinary person who, through this brain injury, became this foundational figure for understanding how memory normally works.
He lived from 1926 to 2008, right? And scientists studied him pretty much constantly from late 1957 until he passed away.
That's right. And the pivotal moment, the thing that changed everything, was a surgical procedure back in 1953. It was considered groundbreaking at the time. He suffered from really severe epileptic seizures, and the hope was that this surgery, a bilateral medial temporal lobectomy, could cure him.
Okay, bilateral medial temporal lobectomy. That sounds pretty major. What did they actually remove?
It was major. They removed roughly the front two-thirds of his hippocampus on both sides. The hippocampus is often called the brain's memory factory, And they also took out crucial surrounding areas, the parahippocampal cortices and taurinal cortices. These bits are really key for getting information into the hippocampus, plus parts of the piriform cortices and the amygdala.
Wow. So a drastic measure.
Very drastic. But the seizures were debilitating. This was seen as a last resort.
And the outcome, it wasn't what anyone fully expected, was it?
Not entirely. The good news was it did help with his epilepsy, significantly. But the devastating side effect was this profound amnesia, specifically anterograde amnesia.
Anterograde, meaning he couldn't form new long-term memories after the surgery.
Exactly. Anything new, facts, events, faces, it just wouldn't stick long term. He was sort of trapped in that moment, or maybe the few minutes just before. The immediate past kept slipping away.
And this is the part that's just fascinating. His old memories from before the surgery, they were largely okay.
Yeah, remarkably so. He could recall his childhood, his family history, events from decades earlier, but ask him what he did an hour ago, or who the doctor was he just met. Blank.
That contrast is just mind-bending.
It really is. And what's also interesting is that much later, with better imaging technology in the late 90s and then studies after his death, these were done between 2009 and 2014, they found out more.
Like what?
Well, the damage was actually more widespread than they first thought. But also, surprisingly, about half of his hippocampus had actually survived the surgery back in '53.
Huh. So it wasn't a total removal.
No. And they also found a separate small lesion in his prefrontal cortex, which might have happened during the surgery itself, maybe when the surgeon had to lift the frontal lobe.
Okay, so the picture got even more complex over time.
Exactly. More nuanced, which in turn made his case even more valuable for science.
So this one tragic case, HM's condition, it became this absolute cornerstone for understanding memory. It provided, undeniable proof that memory isn't just one thing in the brain.
Right. It smashed the old idea of a single memory bank. It showed us there are distinct, separate memory systems. That was revolutionary.
Okay, so what are these distinct systems? HM helped us draw a line between them, right?
Absolutely. He really helped clarify the difference between declarative memory and procedural memory.
Declarative. That's like facts and events, things you can consciously declare.
Precisely. Your what and when memory. Remembering names, dates, what happened at a party, historical facts, the kind of stuff you can talk about.
And because his hippocampus was damaged.
Right. His hippocampus was central to forming and consolidating new declarative memories. So after the surgery, that ability was severely impaired. He couldn't learn the researchers' names even after working with them for years, couldn't remember new appointments.
Okay, so that system was broken for new information, but then there's procedural memory. What's that?
Procedural memory is more about the how. It's the unconscious memory for skills, habits, motor actions. Think about riding a bike or typing or playing a musical instrument. Things you learn by doing.
And HM could still do that, learn new skills.
Amazingly, yes. This was one of the most stunning findings. For instance, they had him do this task where he had to trace a star shape while looking only at its reflection in a mirror.
That sounds tricky.
It is. Most people struggle at first. But HM got better at it over time. With practice, his motor skills improved.
But he wouldn't remember actually doing the task before?
Exactly. Each time they presented it to him, he'd say he'd never seen it before, had no conscious memory of practicing, yet his performance showed he had learned it. His hands remembered, even if his conscious mind didn't.
Wow. So that showed this type of learning, procedural learning, happens somewhere else, independently of the hippocampus.
Precisely. It pointed towards other brain areas being crucial for this, like subcortical structures, the cerebellum and the basal ganglia, areas involved in motor control and habit formation.
So this preserved motor learning, as you called it, that was huge scientifically.
Monumental. It was definitive proof that learning could happen without conscious awareness or recall, that our brains have these parallel tracks for different kinds of knowledge. It explained, on a neurological level, why you can know how to do something without being able to fully explain how you do it.
Okay, so HM turned our understanding of memory systems upside down. But you mentioned earlier these newer frameworks, learnography and Brainpage theory. How does HM's case connect there? Does it offer even deeper lessons?
Yeah, I think it absolutely does. It pushes us beyond just what memory is, to think about the very design of learning and knowledge transfer.
Tell me about these frameworks, learnography first, maybe.
Okay, so think of learnography as a system trying to describe how our brains are actually wired to learn most effectively. It emphasizes things like physical interaction, understanding our environment spatially, how we manage time during learning tasks. It's very grounded in the brain's physical and sensory experience.
And Brainpage theory.
Brainpage theory is this idea that when we learn something, especially declarative knowledge, the brain physically creates specific neural connections or circuits, like dedicated pages or modules, to store and retrieve that information. It's about building knowledge into the brain's structure.
Right, like creating a physical representation of the knowledge.
Kind of, yeah. A neural footprint.
So how does HM fit into this? How is his case a blueprint for these ideas?
Well, his inability to form new declarative memories is a perfect, if tragic, illustration of what Brainpage theory calls brainpage failure. Meaning, without that functioning hippocampus acting as the gateway or the printing press, the brain simply couldn't create those new, stable brain pages for long-term declarative knowledge. Sensory input came in, but it couldn't be encoded properly into a lasting module.
So it highlights how crucial that encoding step is. It's not just about storage, it's about the physical creation of the memory trace.
Exactly. It shows how biologically dependent that process is and how vulnerable. If the mechanism for printing the brain page is offline, the knowledge just doesn't get recorded long term.
Okay, and what about learnography? You mentioned his procedural learning was intact.
Yes, and that provides really strong support for learnography's core ideas. His case affirms the argument that deep learning, especially skill-based learning, seems rooted in physical interaction, in spatial awareness, in repeated task-specific practice.
Not just listening to someone explain it.
Right, not primarily through passive verbal instruction. His brain demonstrated that even when the system for conscious declarative memory was shattered, the system's underlying action-based procedural learning could still function, could still build knowledge through doing.
Learnography apparently has these 7 dimensions for analyzing learning.
It does. Things like definition spectrum, function matrix, block solver, hippocampus, module builder, task formator, and dark knowledge. We don't need to unpack them all now.
Probably for the best.
Yeah, but what's interesting with HM is how his condition maps onto these. His hippocampus related to spatial navigation and memory encoding via the hippocampus, and his module builder, the part creating those declarative brain pages, were clearly severely impaired.
Makes sense.
But other dimensions, like function matrix, understanding how things work, and task formator, building routines and habits, they seem to remain active, at least partially. That's why he could learn motor tasks and develop routines, even without remembering the specific learning episodes.
You also mentioned dark knowledge. That sounds intriguing. What is that?
Dark knowledge refers to all the learning and memory processing that happens beneath the surface of our conscious awareness. Subconscious stuff.
Like intuition or skills we can't quite articulate?
Sort of, yeah.
Yeah.
HM's case is a powerful example. Even when his conscious memory formation was blocked, his brain was still capable of certain kinds of learning and processing in the dark, you could say. It suggests there's a whole layer of learning happening that we might not even be aware of.
And that has implications for how we teach or design learning experiences.
Huge implications. It suggests we could potentially tap into these subconscious pathways more effectively. Instead of focusing solely on conscious, effortful learning and memorization, it kind of opens up a whole new perspective.
So if we put HM's story together with these learnography insights, it seems to pose a pretty serious challenge to traditional education, doesn't it?
It really does. The sources we looked at make a very provocative claim here.
Which is?
They suggest that, quote, during high-class teaching, students' amygdala is hijacked and hippocampus is blocked in the pathways of knowledge transfer.
Wow. Hijacked amygdala, blocked hippocampus. That's strong language. What's the implication?
The implication is that the stress, or perhaps the passive nature of some traditional classroom settings, might actually put the brain into a state that hinders effective learning and memory formation, that the environment itself could be counterproductive.
So the claim is essentially that students might, in a functional sense, end up a bit like HM within the school system, unable to properly consolidate knowledge because of how it's being presented.
That's the provocative suggestion, yes.
Yeah.
That the system itself might inadvertently create barriers to forming those lasting brain pages because it's not aligned with how the brain naturally learns best, especially under pressure or passive conditions.
Okay, so if that's the critique, what's the proposed solution from the learnography perspective?
The proposal's a pretty radical shift. It calls for moving towards learning environments that are more brain compatible, more student-driven, action-based environment.
Like HM's procedural learning.
Exactly. The core idea is that learning isn't something that's just delivered to a student through teaching. It's something that has to be actively built into the brain circuits through action, through engagement.
So students building their own brain pages.
Yes, through movement, through repetition, through hands-on problem solving, through physically interacting with the concepts and the environment.
It sounds like reimagining classrooms almost as memory labs.
That's a great way to put it. Memory labs, where the focus shifts from just delivering lesson plans to actively activating the brain circuits needed for deep learning and durable memory. It's a call to really integrate what we know from neuroscience into how we design education.
It's quite a vision.
It is. And it stems directly from understanding cases like HM's.
When you step back, Henry Molaison's story is just profound. The personal tragedy is immense, obviously.
Unimaginable, really.
But his contribution, largely unknowing on his part, was just monumental for science. The sheer number of experiments he participated in day after day without remembering the previous ones, it's incredible selflessness in a way.
Absolutely. And his case didn't just illuminate basic memory function. It was crucial for understanding severe memory disorders like Alzheimer's disease. It gave researchers vital clues and spurred efforts to find treatments.
His life really demonstrated that memory isn't just this abstract mental thing. It's deeply biological. It's about neural circuits. It's about physical engagement. It's about these different systems working or not working.
And that challenges all of us, doesn't it?
Yeah.
To think about our own learning.
It does. So the question for you, listening right now, is what does this all mean for how you learn? Could it be that the most effective way for you to truly grasp something new isn't just by reading about it or listening passively or trying to rote memorize it?
What if, as HM's preserved abilities hinted, it's more about actively building that knowledge through movement, through spatial engagement, through hands-on experience?
Maybe try incorporating some of that action, that doing, into how you approach learning something next time. See what happens.
Yeah, we definitely encourage you to explore these ideas of learnography and brain page development a bit more. Think about how you learn best. Because HM's forgotten memories, paradoxically, have showed a bright light on the learning process. And maybe, just maybe, the future of learning is much more active, much more embodied than we've traditionally thought.